Hello and welcome to this virtual event that's part of our Meet the Candidates series, in which we interview the leading candidates in the race for the mayor of Los Angeles. I'm Austin Cross, host of Midday All Things Considered on KPCC. These virtual events are part of coverage made possible through the support of the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad and Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. Tonight, we're talking with Kevin De Leon, and throughout the event, we invite you to share your questions for the candidate. You can submit yours through the Q&A function located on the right side of your screen. We've also solicited questions from the public prior to tonight. We've received your questions, and I will incorporate them into our conversation. Live captioning is also available. Just click the CC button at the bottom of the video. And now, let's meet the candidate. Kevin De Leon sits on the Los Angeles City Council, where since 2020 he has represented the 14th District, which includes Boyle Heights, Northeast LA, and downtown. He served in the State Assembly from 2006 to 2010 and the State Senate from 2010 to 2018, where he was elected President Pro Tem in 2014. He made an unsuccessful run for the U.S. Senate against Dianne Feinstein in 2018. De Leon is a former labor organizer with the California Teacher Association and the National Education Association. He was born in LA, and he is 55 years young. And as made evidence by his presence on the stage here tonight, he is hoping to add yet another office to his resume as the mayor of Los Angeles. Councilman De Leon, thank you so much.
No, thank you so very much.
For making the time. We have a lot to get through tonight, so succinct answers will be appreciated by all.
I will try.
Well, you've said that homelessness is the #1 issue in LA. So let's start there. And to help kick things off, let's watch this brief introduction from Ethan Ward, who covers homelessness for KPCC and LAist.
Hi, I'm Ethan Ward. I used to be unhoused. I now cover the homelessness crisis. There are roughly 66,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in Los Angeles. Those numbers could rise when we learn the results of our 2022 count later this spring. Some are young students, they're over the age of 55, they're transgender, some are working full-time jobs. They're living in their cars, in RVs, and on the streets. Voters responded to the increased visibility of homelessness by voting for measures that would build more apartments for people experiencing homelessness. But those units are coming online slowly, and there aren't enough shelter beds. There have been lawsuits. Some have called for the homelessness crisis to be treated as a natural disaster with federal emergency responses. One thing is certain, homelessness is the biggest issue on the minds of housed and unhoused voters this year.
Well, with that, I recall from watching your debates that you said that you were homeless in your 20s. How does that experience inform your approach to homelessness today?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and with all the listeners of KPCC. Let me say that we used to rent a room in an already crowded house. We used to rent a room at the bottom of the house in the basement. In my early 20s, for a few years, I experienced homelessness, where I slept on friends' couches because of their gratitude. I slept in the car, and I also slept on the floor of an office that I worked at for at least a year. So I know what housing insecurity feels like, and Ethan was absolutely right. This is the humanitarian crisis of our lifetime. It leaves us with a profound indelible mark of shame to have so many individuals living in our streets, in their cars, in our parks, our alleyways every single night. And that's why I think that the people of LA want a doer. You know, we can be on the debate stage and we can pontificate about the issue of homelessness, but I can give you a perspective because I've rolled up my sleeves and I've been out there for a year and a half in both in Skid Row and throughout City Council District number 14. And I can tell you that people desperately want housing. They want shelter, both interim as well as permanent housing. And I can tell you this, we can move heaven and earth to build football stadiums and as well as shopping malls, but somehow, some way, the machine of progress grinds to a screeching halt when it comes about building housing, both interim and permanent, for unhoused neighbors in the city of LA. That's why, in the short time that I've been on City Council, I built the largest tiny home village in the United States of America. In the short time I've been on City Council, they have already adopted unanimously my visionary 25 by 25, 25,000 units by the year 2025.
Okay, and we're going to get into more of that later.
Okay.
You mentioned that you know how it feels, but I'm wondering, in those moments when you are making decisions, how would you describe the feeling if you think back to that experience that you had When you try to relate to other people, how would you describe that feeling? What would
Well,
you, what would you label it?
it's a profound feeling of insecurity. It's a feeling of, quite frankly, of embarrassment, of shame. Luckily, during my years, a few years, in my early 20s when I experienced homelessness, I didn't numb any of my pain with any illicit drugs at the time. In many ways, I was very, very lucky. It's a lot different today with a lot of the drugs that are on our streets today, crystal meth, now fentanyl, that's having a profound impact, on unhoused neighbors every single day. But I can tell you this, deep insecurity, low self-esteem, a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, not wanting folks to know that you in fact are experiencing homelessness. Even though I experienced homelessness in my early 20s because I was unceremoniously kicked out of college at the time. Not good grades, obviously at the time, didn't know what to do. Couldn't go back home because I was embarrassed. My mother would be asking me, what are you doing back here so soon? Because of the generosity of many friends, I slept on couches and I slept in my car. But it is remarkably much more different and much more profound in LA because we are the epicenter of homelessness nationwide in the district that I represent, that I have the honor to represent. We are in fact ground zero for homelessness nationwide.
So let's talk about your plan. You want to build 25,000 units by 2025. How does something like that become a reality?
Listen, we need to build, and that's just the bottom line. We need to find every available public space, that's city, that's county, that's state and federal level, so we can eliminate the land cost. We have to be much more restrictive, if you will, in terms of the cost. The HHH, I think, politically was a ballot initiative. Proposition HHH was a very good idea. I think the execution was badly flawed. I think the housing doctrine of the housing department for the city of LA is how do we take the longest and how do we spend the most money, to build permanent housing for unhoused residents. We need to have pre-approved plans so we can move quickly and actually, approve the construction of homeless units. We need to take advantage of adaptive reuse, which is a fancy word of saying, let's go buy, properties, commercial properties, and quickly convert them into housing. We need to have master leasing, which is taking advantage of all of the vacancies currently that exist, not just in the city of LA, but throughout the region of LA, and quickly place our unhoused neighbors in those vacancies throughout the city of LA. It's within reach, and like I said, if we can move heaven and earth to build football stadiums as well as shopping malls and basketball arenas, then we can do the same thing for unhoused neighbors in LA.
Well, a lot of people might be wondering, though, homelessness is not a new issue in LA. If the government couldn't do it before, how could they do it now?
I can understand that 100%, and I can actually relate with that. But let me reiterate, I've been on the council for 1 year and 6 months now. So people want a doer. They don't want someone who's going to pontificate and theorize about the issue. In the short time that I've been on the city council, I have created more housing opportunities than any elected official, whether you're in Congress, whether you're in the state legislature, county board supervisor, or city council. It's a question of figuring out how the systems are badly misaligned and disjointed altogether. And it's about leadership, ultimately, at the end of the day. Anyone can make a big, bold pronouncement on the issue of housing and homelessness, but you want someone who's going to be able to deliver. And the bottom line is this, and it can be fact-checked. I've delivered more housing opportunities than any elected official in the short time I've been on the city council.
We have invited a couple of community members into the studio to ask a question of the candidate, which
Wonderful.
is you. And tonight we have Keith Crenshaw, who is an unhoused community member. Keith, thank you so much for being here, and we would love to hear your question.
All right.
Hi, Keith.
Honorable candidate, it's good to meet you.
It's
in
good to
person.
meet you. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Yes. Okay. Here's my question. Honorable
sir.
candidate, hope you can hear me through the mask
Yes,
a
I
little
can.
bit.
Yes.
Okay, good stuff. 25% of homeless sector employees are people with lived experience. Now, that's a fact, according to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, as a quote by Executive Director Jeff Olivet. So the question is, how do you plan on raising the voices of those with lived expertise And how would you infuse that value into your policies?
That's a very good question, because we have individuals who have experienced homelessness already, to your point and to Keith's point, who understand, what homelessness feels like and everything that goes with it. I think individuals whose voices are lifted, who are raised, can actually play a huge, role in dealing with this crisis when it comes to the issue of housing, when it comes to the issue of wraparound services, whether it's both mental health as well as drug addiction, what's the issue with regards to employability and actually having a real tangible job to move forward and having a pathway to recovery. So lifting those voices up, I think, to me, are very, very critical, and they can play a huge role in moving towards housing, our unhoused neighbors. Now, folks like to talk about the issue of solving the crisis of homelessness. That's a little more complex right there, because when we're talking about deep inequities in our economic systems, when we're talking about institutional racism that's been with us, if not decades, for centuries, when we're talking about severe mental illnesses, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolarness, whether it's PTSD, depression, when we're talking about drug addictions, one time it was crack, heroin, and now it's crystal meth, now it's fentanyl. We have the Drug Enforcement Administration, we have the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we have all these law enforcement agencies at the federal level, and they have proven actually to be quite highly ineffective in curtailing the flow of illicit drugs into the United States. So that's why a lot of these issues are very complex, but what's within reach is actually building the housing and acquiring the housing. That's absolutely critical to put a roof over the head, to provide a modicum of dignity and respect so we can stop the hemorrhaging, and that's just the first step. Obviously, with the wraparound service, and not everyone's going to need wraparound services, and Keith will know this very well. Not everyone's going to require wraparound services. For some folks, I lost a job or two, a lot of bad luck, and those folks, we put a roof over their head, they're going to get on the pathway to recovery sooner rather than later. But then we have a cohort of individuals who are your biggest cost drivers, who are severely mentally ill and drug addicted, or either one. So those will need the severe wraparound services will be critical. But in short, lifting the voices of those who have experienced homelessness, who can give us a lot of wisdom, experience, and knowledge.
Keith, thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much, Keith.
Councilman, you've touted your success moving unhoused people in El Sereno into converted motels.
Yes.
You've also relocated encampments from Main Street downtown and near El Pueblo Monument. But some housing advocates have criticized you, saying you're pursuing a policy of banishment for LA's unhoused. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, let me say this, and let me be very clear, because I don't live in a world of absolutes, and I think that's why I'm running for mayor, to exert the leadership that's needed and to withstand the cacophony of criticisms, whether it's on the right or it's on the left. And when so-called activists say that moving folks into housing is somehow criminalization, I'm a little perplexed by that, somewhat bewildered, because number one, it's not humane. Number two, it's not progressive to let people die on the streets of Los Angeles. That's just the bottom line. And that's been the status quo for politicians at every level of government. And you said it, not years, but in fact, decades, this issue has been going on. I had the good fortune to win outright in my primary in March of 2020. And as a result, I took time to analyze the systems at the county level, at the local level, and I thought it was bewildering to me. And that's why, with excellent staff that I have, we've actually, speaking truth to power, and we have moved with swiftness, decisiveness, and getting folks off the streets and putting a roof over their head. And you know what? 90% of unhoused individuals will readily accept that housing. The problem has been the inventory and stock has simply not been there. So when so-called advocates, I would qualify, demand that they stay on the streets, then what you're doing is you're letting the perfect get in the way of the good, because that means they should live there for 5 years without any access to bathrooms or showers or a heater, or if you're a woman who's sexually assaulted on any given night, that the only thing that protects you is a flimsy zipper. That's not going to happen in my watch, nor has it been happening on my watch. So it may happen on other elected officials' watch at every level of government, but not on mine. I'm about action, I'm about doing, and that's what I've been doing.
As a reminder, if you would like to ask tonight's candidate a question, you can do so through the Q&A function located on the right side of your screen. Well, so now I want to transition into housing. My colleague David Wagner covers that topic for KPCC and LAist, and he sets the scene for us.
I'm David Wagner, and I cover housing for KPCC and LAist. California has the highest poverty rate in the nation, mainly due to the cost of housing. Surveys during the pandemic revealed that about 2/3 of LA tenants are burdened by high rents, and more than 40% live in overcrowded homes. Most LA residents are renters, but the city reserves 3/4 of its residential land for single-family homes most Angelenos cannot afford. State regulators recently rejected LA's plans to accommodate new housing. They said the city failed to address long-standing patterns of racial segregation. Many renters lost work during the pandemic and fell behind on their rent. But more than a year after the city launched its rent relief program, most applicants are still waiting for funds. Promises to curb rent hikes and displacement have not stopped tenants from facing huge increases and threats of eviction. At the same time, small landlords say they've been unable to pay their mortgages after being cut off from the promised relief.
Well, you know, Councilman, many people are still recovering financially from the pandemic. A lot of Angelenos are just one missed paycheck away from that same kind of uncertainty. So you mentioned the systems, you mentioned the greater economy before. How does LA stop more people from falling into homelessness?
That's a very good question. We have a goal of 450,000 more housing units in the city of LA for the next 8 years, 456,000 to be exact. Half of them have to be affordable housing, and that has created a huge crisis in the city of LA for a whole variety of reasons. You know, elected officials have not wanted to build, to produce more housing, and more specifically, more affordable housing. In a city where the average household income is $62,000 a year, where the median price of a home is $1 million, where the average rental is $2,600, you either have to be super wealthy or, quite frankly, you're super out of luck. And that's why, you know, as mayor of the city of Los Angeles, I'll mandate affordable housing. You simply cannot allow the market forces to dictate the type of supply that will be made available to everyday Angelenos. I'll also, you know, for many Angelenos who are struggling to save enough money to buy a house, you know, I'll supercharge a very depleted first-time home buyers plan in the city of LA. You have 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 929 square feet units or housing homes that are up for sale that are selling listed price $1 million, but will probably sell at $1.4 million. So that is, you know, a result of a supply issue, of an inventory issue, and we have to build. But let me underscore the following. We have to build affordable housing. If you don't build affordable housing, then, you know, the problem will only get worse in the city of Los Angeles.
Well, you mentioned that housing, but aren't there zoning issues
Yes.
that prevent much of that housing construction?
No, you're absolutely right. And we have to start rezoning. And we can, you know, meet our goals. We can double our goals, 450,000, which is the next 8 years, 50,000 every single year. We can actually double it with certain zoning changes with mid-level, you know, high rises, not skyscrapers, but, you know, 3 to 4, perhaps maximum 5 stories in zones throughout the city of LA on commercial corridors, whether it be Wilshire Boulevard, whether it be Ventura Boulevard or elsewhere. That can be done, but it has to be done with the right leadership. Because what we witnessed and what we're experiencing during the coronavirus pandemic is the rich got richer, the poor got poor, and the middle class got smaller. And housing insecurity is the main issue for so many Angelenos because, to your point, folks are 1 or 2 paychecks away and, you know, a little dose of bad luck, and now all of a sudden, you know, you're out in the streets. If you're lucky, you have a car, and if you stop, you lose your job and you lose your ability to pay your car, then you're actually on the streets. And that's what's been happening with quite regularity in the city of LA.
Well, you know, at greater issue, which I'm sure people could talk about for a very long time, is that when we think about the housing crisis in Los Angeles, there's a big question of who Los Angeles is for. Is it really for everybody, or is it just for an elite few? And within that conversation, you have the NIMBYs, of course, and there are NIMBY groups, not in my backyard groups, that effectively reduce the sites available for affordable housing in Los Angeles. Do you have a plan for how to get around that, work with them?
It's the issue of leadership, and you're absolutely right. I just did a ribbon cutting ceremony in the neighborhood of Eagle Rock, 90041 in Northeast LA. And I've been the subject of 2 recall attempts. because I built a tiny home village for our unhoused neighbors. I could have, stopped the project. It could have capitulated and just, canceled it altogether. But I was determined to move forward, and I did. And we did the ribbon cutting ceremony. If you drive down Colorado Boulevard, down Broadway, down Figueroa, you will see no homeless encampments because they have a roof over their head, a locked door, an HVAC system, 3 meals a day, access to showers, as well as bathrooms, washers, and dryers. But that is leadership. This is not theoretical. That's why I'm saying we can
specifically, is there a plan in mind for how you would get around that or work?
Yeah, you have to rezone certain parts of the city of LA. You can do this intelligently. That doesn't mean that you're going to build, high density right in the middle of neighborhoods, whether it be Hancock Park, Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Eagle Rock, Highland Park, or elsewhere. But we do have corridors within the city of LA where we can densify, if you will, and we can do this intelligently. But it takes leadership to execute and do it. It takes taking the planning department, building the safety, LADWP, LA Fire Department, and working in concert with each other to produce and exercise and secure the results that we want. It can be done. And the future that we want for the city is within reach, but only with the right leadership.
So you mentioned leadership, and then I go back to my question again, that homelessness isn't a new issue in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Short of pontificating about why we haven't seen that sort of leadership before, but if it was easy, it might have been done before. So I guess I'm wondering, when it comes to this sort of thing, if nobody could do it before, how convinced are you that you could do it?
Well, I've been doing it. That's why I'm not waiting for the fancy title of mayor or my name up on the door, because I've been exercising that leadership today. Let me say this. No more blue ribbon commissions. No more studies. No more reports. We've had so many studies and reports from foundations and other folks that every politician in the country deserves an honorary degree on the issue of homelessness. This is about action, and this is about leadership. This is about execution, ultimately at the end of the day. This is not about, talking around this issue or getting this PhD or this JD or this MD, and a whole acronym and alphabet suit of titles. This is about actually where the rubber hits the road. And that's why, again, I'm not waiting for the fancy title of mayor to lead on this issue, because I'm leading right now. What I've done successfully for CD14 is what I want to do for the rest of the city of Los Angeles. And by the way, 80% of unhoused neighbors are off the streets in Northeast Los Angeles and have a roof over their head. It's a combination of both interim as well as permanent. But what I'm not doing is I'm not waiting for the perfect to get in the way of the good. And that's why you have to exercise the leadership and the power that you have, to get folks off the street. And by the way, every single time we got folks off the street, didn't need LAPD at all whatsoever. You engage with folks, and they said, yes, I'll take the hotel room key, home key. I got a tiny home for you. And I was just at the tiny home village in Eagle Rock just the other day, and you should see some of them right now, the way they're fitted with their own different styles. Folks bring in, what they want to bring in to decorate, and it's amazing. People are being empowered. People, feel better about themselves. But I recognize it's just the first step. It's not the panacea. We have more ways to go in terms of building and acquiring the housing that's necessary to put a permanent roof over our unhoused neighbor's head. But it is a start, and it is the beginning.
On the other side of the coin, one of our audience members submitted a question ahead of this evening's conversation, and they say that LA has an emergency decree prohibiting rent increases for 12 months. Landlord costs to maintain their buildings have gone up. There's inflation, of course. LA city and water fees are up. So they ask, when would you end this decree that gives to give landlords some fairness?
Yeah, that decree is going to end in a few months, most likely by August of this year, at the end of summer. But let me say this. We have experienced earthquakes and wildfires, civil unrest, as well as severe economic recessions. But we have never, ever experienced in our lifetimes a global pandemic that brought us to our knees. Economically, at the height of the pandemic in LA County, my district was actually ground zero for both infections as well as mortality rates. So the idea of a tsunami of more individuals becoming unhoused is a very terrifying, thought. That's why we had to have protections, an eviction moratorium for folks who are frontline workers relegated to the back of line for life-saving vaccinations or PPE equipment, essential workers treated like expendable workers. But to the point of those landlords who hold a note and they have to pay mortgage themselves. And I understand that, and I respect that. This is going to end soon, and they will obviously, will be able to move forward with the type of rental agreements that they currently have or they had previous to the pandemic. I know it's about those who hold the note, the mortgage, the landlords, and those who are the tenants as well. And we both have to protect them, but those emergency protections will be expiring very, very soon.
I was looking at some recent numbers, but many landlords have, yet to receive funding and support. And I guess the question is, if you were mayor and these protections went away, what would you do on the other end to protect the tenants from maybe a sweeping amount of evictions that could happen as a result of those protections going away?
That's a very good question, and it's a combination of things. It's a combination of protections and and moving forward ordinances to protect everyday tenants from falling into homelessness or being pushed out into the street, displacement, gentrification, wanting to move a family out who's been there maybe 10, 15, 30 years, and all of a sudden, you have acai bowl, slow pour coffee shops, appearing in neighborhoods, and obviously they're being displaced and gentrified. We need to make sure that we don't destroy the social fabric of these neighborhoods. So protections and moving forward with ordinances is very important. But let me go back to fundamentally several of the questions you asked, which were really critical, which are the issue of zoning, the issue with regards to the lack of supply and inventory, and we need to build, and we need to acquire the housing that's critical for the affordable. They need to be done simultaneously, because if it's just about protections and ordinances, then we're just in a sort of a reactionary, mode. We have to be proactive in building the inventory stock that is for affordable housing in the city of LA.
We are talking with LA City Councilman and mayoral candidate Kevin De Leon. As a reminder, if you would like to ask tonight's candidate a question, you can do so through the Q&A function located on the right side of your screen. Let's turn now to policing. Mayor Eric Garcetti recently proposed an 8.5% increase in the police department's operating budget for the next fiscal year. That's about $149 million. Do you support that proposal?
I haven't looked at it yet, so I haven't made a determination. I will be later this week analyzing the mayor's proposal to the budget committee. I've always said very clearly that I grew up in a neighborhood that had its fair share of violence, so I know what fear feels like. The most important job of a mayor is to make sure that all Angelenos are safe. But before we get into a conversation about hiring thousands of more police officers, we need to get our own house in order, number one. Let me be very clear about that. We have to utilize the current resources that we have much more effectively and efficiently. We need to get our LAPD officers off the mental health front lines and back on the line of duty. And the reason why I say this, at any given moment, and we've all seen this as Angelenos, someone who is having a psychotic, break, and whether it's on Sepulveda, whether it's on Western, whether it's on Wilshire Boulevard, you have a swarm of LAPD officers. And at the same time, you have someone who's a victim of gun violence, or you have someone who's been robbed. I'd rather have our police officers dealing with solving and preventing crime as opposed to dealing with the issue of mental illnesses as well as homelessness and drug overdoses. So we can better utilize the current resources that we have. In fact, we can hire up to 320 police officers right now as we speak, because we're budgeted for 9,706. Let's make sure we hire up, because we've been losing officers on the back end due to attrition, retirements, or police officers who probably perhaps want a better environment, a more cush job, so they want to go work in Santa Clarita, or they want to work in Manhattan Beach, or Valencia, or Thousand Oaks, or elsewhere. Maybe they've had their full share of working in the big urban city like LA. But we can hire right now, budgeted 320 more police officers.
Well, to meet the mayor's staffing goals, the city would need to rehire 780 officers during the next budget year. And I believe you were asked before during some previous debates about the staffing at LAPD. If you were mayor, would you increase the LAPD? Is the size okay by you right now? Decrease?
No, I wouldn't decrease the LAPD officers, number of sworn officers. I'd keep the budget as same. Let me go back to what I said a few moments ago, is that we're budgeted to actually hire 320 more police officers. Also, we have roughly 300 plus LAPD reserves that carry badge, And I don't want them putting orange cones, at LA Live when Taylor Swift comes into town or the Lakers are playing. I'd rather utilize them in a much more effective manner when there's a hot spot, whether it's in Koreatown, whether it's South LA, whether it's in East LA, whether it's on Ventura Boulevard in the Valley or elsewhere. I'd rather utilize those officers in a much more effective manner as opposed to dealing with traffic.
There are currently 3 city council candidates who support the defund movement and want to see more money moved to community programs. How would you respond to future calls to take money away from the LAPD?
Let me underscore what I just said. I wouldn't defund the police. Let me underscore and emphasize that we can actually transform this economy, and we can modernize our very antiquated grid. And you can say, well, where is he going with this? The grid, LADWP and LAPD. What's this have to do? But they're actually, compatible with each other, because we can disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, what was formerly CYA and County Jail in San Quentin, Folsom, and Chico and Pelican Bay. We can send our kids off to Cal State LA or UCLA or LA Trade Tech or LA City College by creating, good jobs into the middle class, jobs that are not can't be outsourced to right to work state or offshore to Guangzhou, China or Mexico. Their labor-intensive jobs must be done physically on site, and they must be local hires in zip codes throughout the city of LA where there's very limited opportunities. So that is my investments in transforming the economy of the city of LA. So when folks want to LAPD is over here, the issue of climate change and DWP is over there, the issue of housing is over there, and the issue of homelessness is over there. They're actually all connected with each other. If you want a city that's inclusive, if you want a city of economic growth for everyone, regardless of who you are and where you come from, the color of your skin, and your legal status.
Well, to focus then on the LAPD specifically as mayor, how would you want the police chief to address the frayed relationships between the LAPD and many of the communities it serves?
Well, you want a police chief that exudes strong leadership. You want a police chief that is willing to grow and learn and engage with historically marginalized communities that have little or no voice when it comes to the future of their city. You want a police chief that is also flexible, has an open mind, and is willing to not just be a very good strategist, but a tactician, listening to communities of color, vulnerable communities. And I think that starts with cultural change in the LAPD Academy. Interestingly, the majority of LAPD is in fact minority. The majority is minority. So it's not a question of diversifying LAPD. It's a question of changing cultural norms and mores within an institution that has adopted perhaps an old paramilitary Midwest values style back in the turn of the century. And that's changing the cultural norms and mores within an institution to make sure that whether you live in Sherman Oaks or South LA, whether you live in Woodland Hills or Watts, or that everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
Do you think Chief Michael Moore is doing a good job?
I think the Chief Michael Moore is a good police chief. I've had the opportunity to engage with him on several issues. I think he's doing a good job, and we have a good working relationship.
So you've spoken about the need to reform the LAPD. What do you see the LAPD as an institution looking like in 5 years?
Diversity is not an issue because they're a majority-minority institution. What I'd like to see in 5 years is excellent, relationships with vulnerable communities throughout the city of LA. But let me underscore something which I think is very important, because I don't want to paint a picture where in communities of color, both Latino and Asian, African-American communities, where there's frayed relationships. Because in Boyle Heights and South LA, there'll be a lot of folks too say they're strong supporters of their LAPD, rank and file officers. And some would make arguments that they want even a more of a presence of LAPD officers in those historically marginalized communities. But you got to make sure that everyone, irrespective of the color of skin, is treated with dignity and respect. So what I'd like to see, not in 5 years actually, in a handful of years, is those relationships working in a very positive, collaborative fashion so we can, reduce the level of crime, especially when it comes to gang homicides, and when you can pinpoint in the vast majority of the city of LA where the majority of homicides take place.
Well, let me ask you this, because over the past decade for me, I've lived in Highland Park, Lincoln Heights, and now I live in South Los Angeles. What is it going to take on the part of the LAPD to build the relationships where if something happens in the community, people maybe aren't afraid to call the police? Because I understand right now, based off of my experiences in these communities, that if something happens, a lot of people are hesitant to even be seen talking to the police. So what has to change, you think? Because, you grew up in these neighborhoods as well, and deep down inside, there's a lot happening. It's not just the fear that, there could be somebody who gets, harmed by an officer in some sort of way, but it's just a community difference there. What does the LAPD need to do to maybe build some trust there or change that relationship?
I've always been a strong supporter of community policing, building relationships that are sustainable over the long run, where you have the historic mistrust, particularly in South LA and other parts of the city of LA, that has built a wall for a whole variety of reasons that's understandable and justifiable. Those walls have to be torn down, and they can only be torn down by building, and sustaining, a bond, a relationship of trust. If you don't do that, then those walls will continue to remain very high.
So we're going to change direction now to look at another issue that you've actually mentioned that's important to our readers and listeners, and that's systemic racism. And to get us into that, let's watch a video from my colleague, Josie Huang.
I'm Josie Huang, and I cover Asian American communities in Southern California. There are dozens of Asian diasporas here, and the issues they face are so wide-ranging. Gentrification, inadequate housing, immigration policies that separate families for decades, wage theft on the backs of immigrants who keep our society running, and also language access. Many have also encountered racism. In the last few years, we've seen that racism escalate into violence directed at some of our most vulnerable community members. LA is celebrated for its racial diversity, but it's also one of the most segregated cities in this country. It's a place where time and time again, we've seen systemic racism rear itself. Me and my colleagues at KPCC and LAist have long reported on public demands to restructure policing and to make more strides towards equity in education, housing, and wages. Being mayor of LA means having to confront all of it.
So let's start this section with a question from another community member and a KPCC listener, Susana Renderly. Susana, thank you so much for being here. And what is your question for Kevin De Leon?
Thank you for taking my question, Councilmember De Leon.
Thank you, Susana.
I'm not one of your constituents, but I spend a good amount of time and money in your area and have seen your tiny village at work, so that's lovely. And my question is important not just to me and some of my family members, colleagues, neighbors, and friends, but also relevant to many of the issues that you've talked about tonight. And the question is, have you said, and are you willing to say, that Black Lives Matter? And if not, how come? And if yes, what are you planning to do? What action are you planning to take to operationalize more equity and justice for Angelenos of color and BIPOC?
Yeah, Black lives do matter. I've always said that since day one. Let me underscore that point. When we talk about the issue of homelessness, when we talk about the issue of housing affordability, when we talk about the issue of economic empowerment, economic growth, when we talk about the issue of gentrification and displacement, when we talk about the issue of having more parks and open space and children of color having the ability to have green grass growing underneath their feet, when we talk about the issue of the right to breathe clean air into our lungs, given the fact that we've had politicians in the past as well as very powerful planning commissioners who said we're going to build freeways here, we're going to build parks over there, we're going to rip this neighborhood here and have an industrial zone here, and in these areas we're going to make sure we protect. That is all driven by subjective decision making. Some could easily argue that there was a heavy dose of racism in terms of finalizing, who would benefit from the good things and who would be victimized from the bad things. And we have an ability to transform the city when it comes to the health disparities, when it comes to food deserts, when it comes to where all the concrete, the asphalt, the cement is, when it comes to the issue with regards to our unhoused population and who they look like. And I have the honor to represent Skid Row, and the majority of our Skid Row residents, our neighbors, are African American, where we have the racial disparities that manifest itself in the deep opportunity gaps within our public school system. It all comes together. And that's why you need a mayor who's an activist mayor, who recognizes these deep inequities in our society and will move forward on the issue of how can we, clean up the air that we breathe into our lungs? How can we create more parks and open space in low-income neighborhoods? How can we actually create real jobs that are tangible, that can't be outsourced or offshored elsewhere? A job that puts someone on a pathway, into the middle class. How do we deal with the crisis of homelessness? How do we deal with housing insecurity? So when it comes to Black Lives Matters and those who are vulnerable socioeconomically as well as politically in the city of Los Angeles, we have to work, with a sense of intentionality and purpose in all of these very critical subject matters, and we have to work at it simultaneously. It can't be one-offs. We're done with this and we'll figure this one out afterwards. It has to be done in concert with each other. Thank you very much, Susana.
Yes, thank you, Susana. Well, you spoke about this just a second ago, but many low-income families of color live in parts of the city, and they live near oil wells and areas where pollution is high, and that can have some very negative health effects. What would you do as mayor to ensure that Angelenos can live in neighborhoods that are safe from a health standpoint?
That's a very good question. I represent a district today, CD14, that has 9 major freeways. I have the 2, the 5, the 10, the 101, the 110, the 134, the 210, and the 710 freeways. So these are 9 major freeways that crisscross the district like a serpent that chokes the air, the oxygen out of a young boy's, a young girl's lungs. Carbon dioxide emissions and carbon dioxide equivalent, which is NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, which is ozone, in effect, what it is. It's all that ugly, dirty air that you see. It's what our children are breathing into our lungs every single day. Heat islands, because we don't have grass, we don't have tree for canopy. We have asphalt, we have cement, we have concrete. That's the neighborhood I grew up in, exactly. That's why the first bill I ever introduced was AB, Assembly Bill 31, that created upwards up to 22 brand new parks in the city of LA. This is a very important issue for me. I will, with a sense of intentionality, purpose, passion, and energy, make sure that we greenify, our neighborhoods in the city of Los Angeles, and specifically, those neighborhoods who've had the burden, of pollution, the neighborhoods whose heat rises, tremendously because of heat islands. We have to create the parks. We have to create the tree planting for canopy. We have to create real jobs, real economic opportunities by modernizing our decrepit, antiquated, old grid. If in fact we're going to build out transportation electrification and make sure that we have charging stations in every neighborhood, because it's not enough. For example, if you live in Eagle Rock or Hancock Park or the Palisades and you have an energy efficient home, you have distributed generation rooftop solar, you have energy storage, and you have a charging station, a supercharging station, and your own electric vehicle, a Tesla, whatever it might be. If we're going to actually reduce millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent, we have to democratize the benefits of our climate change policies, which means, in effect, that low-income folks that, listen, you can have an electric vehicle driving in LA, and you're listening to NPR and wait, don't tell me. And that's all good right there. But ultimately what I want to hear is I want to hear Los Tigres del Norte blasting, or I want to hear some hip hop, And when you hear that, then you know that really we are really democratizing, because those who have high educational attainment and high incomes get access to the latest, greatest, and most innovative technologies. So when we talk about the issue of equity, for example, and I know since the George Floyd murder, that equity has been the issue. Equity is an issue I've been dealing with since day one. Now I know it's a big issue now. Everyone's talking about issue. Foundations are talking about equity. Folks are talking about equity funding. I've been doing equity since when it was not even fashionable, since day one. Like I said, the first bill I ever introduced in my life as a legislator was AB 31. And the reason why is because instinctively I felt like we've been investing billions of dollars statewide in creating more parks and open space. And I asked my staff, will you actually do a check on where all these parks were created? And they came back with empirical evidence. Palo Alto, South Salito, Menlo Park, the Palisades, Santa Monica, Laguna Beach. But they weren't created in parks in areas where people needed the parks the most, And that's when I introduced $400 million, which is parks for poor people.
Well, let's keep with what you said about climate action, because I've heard this from a lot of people going into tonight. We've also gotten a lot of questions from our listeners along these lines. What are the most important climate actions LA should take?
Well, I can tell you this because I am the author of Senate Bill 100. I put California, the largest economy in the world, to legally commit itself to 100% clean renewable energy, which is decarbonizing the grid. So what we have to do, one, is we have to modernize our antiquated grid, which means we should be receiving clean electrons on that grid, which is renewable energy, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's geothermal, not nuclear, by eliminating our energy load being, thermal coal or natural gas plants. Two, we have to build out transportation electrification, which is we have 2,900 gas pumps throughout the city of LA. I want 3,000 superchargers, and I want 120,000 chargers. We have to deal with alternative fuels in the ports of Los Angeles as well as our neighbor Long Beach, because that accounts for 30% of all the pollution that our children are breathing into their lungs every single day. We have to create more parks and open space. We have to plant more trees for canopy. We have to become much more resilient, and we have to deal with the issue of water as well too, because a drought is the new normal, and we can no longer rely on snowpacks up in the Sierras or Mount Shasta to have water travel 400 miles from Northern California to Southern California. We have to stay committed to 100% recycling our water by the year 2035. We have to clean up our aquifers so we can store and recharge our water both in San Fernando Valley as well as San Gabriel Valley. And we have to conserve, because our per capita use of water has actually increased in the city of Los Angeles. And if we want to be the city of the future, and we want to be independent of both fossil fuels as well as our reliability on both the Colorado River and river coming in from the fragile Delta ecosystem up north, we have to become much more water independent. But you need a mayor who knows exactly what they're doing on this issue and leads by example with a sense of intentionality and purpose. Because when we do this, we can delink and decouple carbon from GDP, which means you can actually grow an economy. At the same time, you can create real jobs. And when I talk about real jobs, I'm talking about jobs for local hires for folks in South LA, in Watts, in Boyle Heights, MacArthur, Pico Union, Pacoima. So we can have a city that's an inclusive city, a city that works for everyone and not just someone.
Well, our last topic tonight is education. You've gotten a lot in so far. That's pretty good.
You can keep going if you want.
Even though the city does, I'm afraid we only have an hour, my man. Otherwise, well, even though the city does not have a direct involvement with running LAUSD, both Mayor Garcetti and Villaraigosa carved out roles for the city to play in education. So let's hear from my colleague, Mariana Dale.
I'm Mariana Dale, and I report on early childhood as part of our education team. Many families rely on a network of caregivers to raise their kids, one that's been stretched thin during the pandemic. Even as the state expands a free preschool program for 4-year-olds, wide swaths of Los Angeles are considered childcare deserts. Families struggle to find affordable care, and at the same time, workers who are largely Black and brown women often do not make a living wage and are leaving the field. This is important because critical brain development happens in the first years of life. There are consequences when children are not cared for in nurturing and safe environments. Research estimates tens of thousands of LA teenagers and young adults are neither working nor in school. The mayor can play a role in ensuring families have what they need to help children grow and thrive.
You might recall that back in 2018, San Francisco voters narrowly approved a tax on commercial rents to boost the educational quality of child care programs, pay child care workers more, better prepare kids in low-income households for kindergarten. Given the state of healthcare right now, would you consider a tax like that?
Yeah, I would totally consider it. And the reason why is we're talking about the economic security of one of the largest, GDPs on planet Earth, the city of Los Angeles. Listen, this is really important because when you're in kindergarten, and the video, was pre-K, but when you're in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, you're learning how to read. Once you get to the third grade and beyond, you're reading to learn. And the data points are very clear. If you come from South LA, if you come from Watts, if you come from Pacoima or East LA, MacArthur Park, Pico Union, and similar socioeconomic neighborhoods throughout the city of LA, If you haven't learned how to read, if you haven't mastered it by 3rd grade, then it's all, you're just going downhill from that point. And there you can see the difference between those who have access to high educational attainment, higher incomes, and quite frankly, better lives, as opposed to those who experience homelessness, those who end up in the system, those who don't fulfill the potential, the promise that they have. And that's why economic security is tied into education excellence. And the fact is that LA Unified School District is majority, supermajority, people of color, students of color, K through 12. And as mayor of the 2nd largest city in America, it is absolutely imperative, strategic, that I work with the new superintendent of public instruction to be partners, to collaborate, to move projects, whether it's career technical education, not just a pathway into a 4-year university, because I've never believed that a 4-year university or a master's degree or a JD or PhD is a mark of academic excellence or of success. We need to have folks, and the community colleges need to be the backbone. So the mayor and the superintendent have to work hand in glove with each other as equal partners, collaborating with each other to make sure that every single child has a real opportunity to succeed. Listen, if you get folks, who live in Brentwood and they end up going to Stanford, to Harvard or Yale, graduate summa cum laude, magna cum laude, I'm very happy for them. But if you get someone from South LA who ends up at Harvard or Yale, that's more of an aberration. And I don't want the aberration. I want to normalize the pathway. And to me, it doesn't have to be an Ivy League school. It can be Cal State LA, Cal State, Northridge, Dominguez Hills, UCLA, Occidental, LMU. So that creates a pathway to success. But again, it doesn't have to be a 4-year university, but the next mayor has to work strategically, very close, hand in glove with the superintendent, so they have shared strategic ideas to move forward, with making sure that we provide opportunities, for every single child, again, regardless of their zip code, because it's not about academic, the gap. It's about opportunity gaps. Listen, I'm the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a 3rd grade education. My mother spent the vast majority of her life taking care of the very wealthy. I'm the first one, and I'm the only one to graduate, not from college. I'm the only one to graduate from high school in my family. And I wasn't class president, I wasn't ASB president, I wasn't senior class president, I wasn't valedictorian. In fact, I was never even supposed to even run for office. There was activists that predate me, affirmative action program. Affirmative action, I owe everything to affirmative action. If it wasn't for affirmative action, I would not be on the stage here with you today. I guarantee you that. I would never have been leader of the California State Senate if it were not for affirmative action. That gave me an opportunity, and it opened up my world to things that I saw. And when I experienced homelessness in my early 20s in college, I got admitted to college, but I didn't know how to organize myself. I didn't know how to manage my time. I didn't know how to take copious notes. I didn't know how to complete a sentence because I had to take remedial English in college. So you do need these support services for children, especially low-income children and children of color, to give them every opportunity so they can succeed, so they can work at KPCC, so they can be the teachers and the nonprofit directors and the union leaders and the entrepreneurs and executive directors of multi-billion-dollar foundations and the next mayor, and they can be whoever they want to be, and their environment doesn't constrain them to say, hey, all you can do is serve time in prison, or all you can do is live in Skid Row. If you were to ask my mother, hey, Carmen, did you enjoy being a housekeeper? She would have said to you sarcastically, oh, I love serving the rich people. I love, serving them food. Of course, because society said to her, that's all you can do, and that's all we're going to let you do. And I can tell you one thing, that woman with a 3rd grade education was a hell of a lot smarter than I was with a college education.
Well, I want to change directions with the time that we have left here. Your CD14 predecessor, Jose Huizar, is under federal indictment. Another former city councilman, Mitch Englander, was found guilty on corruption charges. Is corruption a significant issue in Los Angeles?
I think corruption, along with Mark Willie Thomas, who has charges with him right now, is an issue that happens at every level of government, whether it's Congress, whether it's state legislative houses, whether it is City Hall. And that's a very good point that you bring, because I was elected with a strong mandate against corruption because of the corruption that rocked my district to its core. And I believe that every elected official, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, has to be transparent, has to exude that sense of leadership, that we will do everything within our power to restore confidence in the electorate of the city of LA. I think it is, endemic, of politics, as a whole, irrespective of your political affiliation. But since I've been in City Hall, I've been restoring confidence by cleaning up the corruption.
So with the time we have left, it's a question about contrast. What differentiates you from the other mayoral candidates?
I think that, all the other candidates, except for one who's a Republican, we all have shared values. We all have shared principles. But there is one main distinction, which is the issue of leadership. We can talk about the issues that we just broached a few moments ago, but it is the issue of bringing a body of work, of speaking truth to power, of exercising that leadership. And I've been doing so for the past 12 years on a whole variety of issues that have impacted, the human condition of everyday Californians and everyday Angelenos. I want to go back to the issue of homelessness. I'm not waiting around for the fancy title of mayor or my name up on the door, because I'm leading on this issue right now. We've had plenty of politicians who've had years, if not decades, to broach this subject, and they have yet to do so. And some of them have now, discovered that homelessness is now indeed a national crisis. I've already known that since day one, and that's why I've housed more individuals in the city of LA in the year 2021. So it's an issue of leadership, it's an issue of action, and it's an issue of doing. And that is the main difference between me and the other candidates.
Just to be clear, I think the other candidate that you're referring to, Rick Caruso, he changed parties, but it is a nonpartisan race. Just going to put that one out there. But that's all the time we have for this conversation with LA City Councilman and mayoral candidate Kevin De Leon. Thank you so much for your time,
It was a real honor to be here with you. Real honor.
This was really very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Join us here this Thursday night at 6 for my conversation with Congresswoman and mayoral candidate Karen Bass. Next week, I'll be interviewing candidates Gina Viola, Joe Buscaino, Mike Fewer, and Rick Caruso. These virtual events are part of coverage made possible through the support by the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. And as a reminder, the primary election is June 7th, and ballots will be mailed to every registered voter in early May. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Austin Cross.